Hello, guys. Thank you so much for joining this episode of the Enneagram and Marriage Pod. I am so grateful to have Danielle Fuller with us today. She is such a gifted researcher, and I met her through her work at Scientific Enneagram, where she has been making statistical analysis on mental health for all of the Enneagram types. And as some of you know, I love the topic of mental health. Not only do Danielle and I share the Master's in Clinical Psychology emphasis, but we just both share such a passion for reducing stigma around mental health. And she has done this work to help us to see what each type struggles with and what each type can do to reduce stress. And we've taken some time together to process through in marriage what people can do as well if they're trying to support a spouse and the spouse is not necessarily receptive to change. Or hopefully you are and you're both willing to do your work because mental health issues affect everyone. And post COVID, we've only seen an increase. So this episode is for everyone. Some of the episodes we do here are not for everyone. This one is. So I am so proud of you for pressing play so that you can not just be intrigued with what types tend to struggle with what mentally, but also just have stability in your life. There's so much increasing pressure on everybody to make sure that we do the best, right? That we get the best grades, the best jobs, that we don't ever show weakness because weakness is not going to be a good survival skill. And instead, I want to remind you, everyone struggles, everyone has areas of weakness and growth needs, and everybody will fall down at some point. So if you think right now we're flying high and I never have problems, know that across time, everybody has stuff. So just lean into this episode, let yourself take a note to, especially not just, like I said, process what's happening by type, but how you can take care of you and support your spouse or family or kids or wherever you're at with it all. I know I have several of these that I'm thinking of right now. I'm like, oh my gosh, my daughter, should she drop this class? Should she stay in it? Like mental health wise? Should my husband take calls? Should he not mental health wise? Like what should I take on to stay sane? I think it's a really valuable question. And I'm saying this from not just a platform, but from somebody whose mom has walked through schizophrenia because of course, genetic markers, but also a sense of increasing busyness, as I'm so privileged to have all of her journals to pour through. And I was even looking at her valedictorian speech today, and I was thinking about how she's like, I want women to have enough time to be with their families. And I loved her hopes for that. But I also know that later down the road, her life was just about her family and kids, and she lost the pieces of wellness. So that's why I especially love having our beautiful guest today, Danielle, Enneagram 9, to truly allow us to see, hey, she's walked through it. She has walked through her own personal crises. She has come to the other side, and now she has so many gifts for us from Scientific Enneagram and a fun app as well. So just be with me in this episode. Try to put away other things. This is a full-on episode to be fully checked into, to listen to watch wherever you're at with us. We are so grateful to have you, and make sure you check out the show notes too. Okay, let's welcome Danielle. Oh, Danielle, I'm so happy to have you on the Enneagram and Marriage podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, we're grateful. And I was just so happy. Tech is working so well. You are all the way over in Scotland. So tell us about your life there across the pond. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your Scientific Enneagram account, which is where I met you.
Yeah, oh wow. So, yes, I live in Edinburgh, Scotland at the moment.
Mhm.
I originally am from Kansas City, but I always really wanted an adventure. I'm a nine, by the way, and so adventure never really happened
Yeah.
until I took some pretty major life steps that I won't go all into. But one of the biggest ones was I decided I wanted to quit my engineering career, which I had spent
Mhm.
almost a decade in, and
Yeah.
I thought, it'd be kind of fun to live abroad, but then
Yeah.
also I had my Enneagram coach certification, was very
Mhm.
interested in psychology, and I found a program in Edinburgh, Scotland, where it's a conversion psychology course. So for people, specifically for people like me who didn't have a background in psychology, who were interested in going into it,
Yeah.
I thought, that's great. I can do
Mhm.
psychology and I can move to beautiful Scotland all at the
Yes.
same time.
Yeah.
Sign me up. So here I am.
Yay. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So that's what brought me over. And then
Mhm.
I'm just trying to stay here as long as my visa will allow.
Yeah. Mm.
So then about scientific Enneagram.
Yes.
Um, so obviously I'm very interested in the Enneagram.
Yes.
But then also I have that scientific background, and
Yes.
doing the master's in psychology really sparked an interest in personality research for me.
Mhm.
Um, I had been looking all around Instagram for different Enneagram accounts that focused specifically on the science side of it.
Mm.
I had found studies on my own, but I couldn't
Yeah.
seem to find that research boiled down and summarized on
Mhm.
Instagram. There were a lot of influencers with
Mhm.
memes and
Mhm.
with really pretty
Correct.
graphics. I am not an illustrator, but
Correct.
very, very pretty
Mhm.
content. But again,
Mhm.
with my scientific background, I was just very honed into
Mhm.
that part.
Mhm.
Um, So after searching and not finding anything, I finally just decided, why not make the account that you want if it doesn't exist? So,
Oh,
so that's what
that's
I did.
that's how I found you. Remember?
Yay! Yeah, yeah.
I was
So yeah,
like,
I use
hi,
scientific
I love
Enneagram.
your account. This is so organized and structured. Who are you? Tell me about yourself.
Ooh. Yeah, my original goal was to just use it as a repository of when I did my own analysis of any research articles I found. I could summarize it in one place, summarize the findings, but also talk about the limitations. That's a big
Yeah.
part of science is, take things at
Yeah,
face value. You look at it with an
exactly.
analytical mind.
Yes.
So take what you can, but also caveat that and see it from both sides. Again, it was like a nine with a one wings dream to be able to
Mm-hmm.
just let's look at the whole picture and also be able to organize it. So that's how it started. But then I also figured, there's not a lot of research out there for the Enneagram. So maybe I could also do some of my own. I'm not funded by
Yeah.
any body. I
Yeah.
don't get paid to do it. I don't have an ethics board overseeing what I'm doing. All I'd have is a scientific mind and a passion and an interest and free time to do it. So
Mhm.
I started doing some of my own studies. I did one recently on Enneagram versus neurodivergence, birth order, and mental health, which we're
Mm,
talking about today.
yes.
And it was just really cool to see the
Mhm.
engagement and to
Mhm.
sift through the findings and um, look at the significant findings that were there, different trends that maybe weren't significant but were notable, and then also, addressing my own limitations of how could this study be
Mm,
done in a professional capacity?
mhm.
How can maybe I just get the ball rolling for somebody who's more
Yeah.
interested later down the line? So
Yes, and I love how you even in your careful research you're so humble, but also just you bring us to that reminder. And I think it's important for listeners to be expansive in this way that correlation does not necessitate causation. And so you're just reminding people these are trends, these are interesting things to look at, these are studies, but they're significant. And that's what we really have noticed with Enneagram research is yes, even if some of the statistics that we learn are quantitative studies or qualitative studies, we're paying attention because these are our lives. So
yeah.
we want to know what does the preliminary research tell us so that we can make our own inferences for our own stories. And so, yes, we're so excited to talk mental health with you today. You're in a 9-7 pairing. For those who are here with us, maybe sharing your pairing, what's something you can tell us about your pairing or something you've come to learn about it? Anything you'd like to share about
Oh
that
man.
first?
I love my seven. I'm also my mom's a seven. My childhood best friend is a seven. My previous roommate's a seven. So I'm just surrounded by
Okay.
sevens,
Yeah,
um,
including right now.
including right now. I love sevens.
But we
Um,
understand we have our issues, so do tell.
no, so we were actually friends for almost a decade before we
Mm,
got together.
yeah.
And I think, a lot of things changed in that decade for him, for me. But the one thing that didn't change was our friendship. That was a constant throughout the highs and the lows,
Yeah.
throughout, you know, him going through divorce, me going through an identity crisis and moving
Yeah.
across the world. We always had that
Yeah.
friendship there.
Yeah.
Um, and I think as a nine, I really needed that proof that I would be continuously seen and accepted for my most honest self. And he had seen me through all of that and
Yeah.
still loved and valued and cherished me. And I
Yeah.
think he's a seven, but a very, very strong eight wing.
Yeah.
So I think he also needed proof that somebody could not only keep up with him and all of his ideas, because he has a
Yeah.
billion,
Yeah. Yeah.
but also um, be with somebody and see evidence that when he did get vulnerable and when
Mhm.
he was going through hard times and expressed those things, that the people around him wouldn't turn on him. So I know I really helped. I was there to help him go through his divorce, and I think that it was kind of a shift point. It was
Yeah.
maybe not the best timing,
Yeah.
but really
Yeah.
just showed he needed that in that
Yeah.
moment. And yeah, I love him to death. We're both in that positivity outlook
Yes. Yes.
triad, so
Love
things are
that.
very fun and upbeat. But we also both have an eight wing, so I think that
Mm.
keeps us pretty grounded and intentional in our relationship. So it
Oh,
works really well.
yeah, that's wonderful. I love that you both have that eight wing and that you both really show up. That's what that tells us. If you're a newer listener, that eight wing is bold enough to do the work. Like you said, you could be just positive, but instead you're both also very passionate
Mhm.
and, direct and able to clarify so that the other person can get your perspective. And yeah, shout out to eights because you guys have a lot of gifts that people often forget. So that's a beautiful merging for you two. And thank you, because I know there's other 9-7s who appreciate hearing hearing that if they're in a tough space to just remember their gifts, their ways of shining together. And we love hearing your story too. And sometimes our stories are all over the place. And then we find somebody that can partner with us and it's like, oh, I just came home. So
Yep.
thanks for sharing that hope piece. And let's talk a little bit about your scientific research. We're talking about mental health, as you know, and let's talk, if it's okay with you, to just walk through the types to see your findings on each type and just any mental health pictures that you found. You do have a background in, I know you're not a therapist, but clinical mental health.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, awesome. So is that okay if we can walk through everything?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, do you mind if I give a quick background, just a
Yes,
quick background on the research?
please.
So I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it
Mm.
was an explorative study on the correlation between mental health and the Enneagram and seeing if different types had specific patterns when it came to mental health diagnoses. Because in the skim of the existing research that I had done, I
Yeah.
hadn't seen any studies who had looked at this, which is wild because I had put a request out to my followers saying, what are you most interested in learning about when it
Mhm.
comes to Enneagram and science? And
Yes.
neurodivergence and mental health and birth order were the loudest. And I decided to do them all at once. I probably could have spread that a little out,
Yeah,
but
but that's great. Ambitious girl. Your eight
yeah, but
showed up.
yeah, but it was definitely a need and it was a hole. And I'm still to this day not really sure why it hasn't been explored
Mhm.
by psychologists, but
Yeah.
I decided to run this exploratory study on my own just through Instagram. And I ended up getting over 1,700 usable responses when it came to mental health, which was an incredible turnout.
Yes, that's
um,
amazing.
it was really nice. As I mentioned, it wasn't conducted through a governing body, and it definitely has limitations like its reliance on self-reported information, like self-reported diagnoses. We weren't going out to doctors asking for their medical records, and also self-reported types, which again is typing is very difficult and nuanced, and sometimes people realize that they've been saying the wrong type for a while. So it had definitely has its limitations. However, I did follow scientific principles and research methods as best I could. So the
Mm.
findings were fascinating.
Yes.
Um,
Love this.
so
I
in
love seeing them,
general,
but I know you're going to spell it out for us even more. So this is so exciting.
um, in general, there were two findings for just overarching mental health, and those were with fours and with nines. So
Mhm.
fours were significantly likely to report having at least one mental health diagnosis, which
Mhm.
I think probably surprises no one.
Yeah, right.
And
Yes.
um, the other side of it, though, was that nines were significantly unlikely to report having a mental health
Mm.
diagnosis. And
Wow.
when I put this out, I had a lot of nines having opinions on this, saying,
Yeah.
I don't know about this because I definitely have anxiety. And I think the key was that the question and how it was phrased and the intent of the research was um, it it doesn't mean that nines
Mm.
don't have mental health issues and are perfectly emotionally stable. It means that they don't have a diagnosis. That was the key in the question was, do you have a
Mhm.
mental health diagnosis? And
Mhm.
I think the flip side for fours, you know, just because you're four doesn't mean you do have a mental health diagnosis. I think there's just a lot of other factors that go into getting that diagnosis that are going to play out differently in the different
Yeah.
types,
Yeah.
like for example fours being very open to talking about the hard parts of life,
Mm.
wanting to be independent and unique, wanting to be different from other people. Fours may maybe a fours just the chemicals in their brain are made in a way that make them more likely to be or to have a mental health issue. And
Mm.
on the other side, it could be that they're just more willing to go out and seek a diagnosis. They're more willing to explore that as a possibility. And on the
Yeah.
flip side, nines, just because they maybe came up as unlikely to have it doesn't mean that they're not struggling. It does probably mean that
Mhm.
they're a little asleep to who they are,
Yeah.
that they maybe are a little laid back and they aren't going to take a lot of action. Before I got
Mhm.
diagnosed with my anxiety, I legitimately
Mhm.
had the thoughts of, I don't want
Mhm.
to trouble my doctor with my problems. So
Yeah, that made
for the longest time, I put off trying to seek a
yes.
diagnosis because
Mhm.
almost gaslighting myself and I don't
Mhm.
actually, seeing
Mhm.
things every way of I could just, is this
Mhm.
just me? Is this just regular life? And
Yeah.
this is just how things are. And I don't want to
Yeah.
burden other people with my problems. So,
Mm. Yeah.
um,
Oh.
but the study overall, so much goes into it. And so that's
Mhm.
where like you could take research findings with a grain of salt. It's very interesting
Mhm.
information, but on the surface, you're like, oh, fours are mentally unhealthy and nines are mentally well. And that is not at all the case. It's
Yeah.
just trends that we can use to
Yeah.
better understand each other.
Right. And even how some types are more likely to want and accept labels, and that might include other types. So it's who goes for more treatments. I've often seen
Mhm.
that ones had reported going for more treatments to get the perfectionism kind of dealt with. And so there are so many iterations. I love how you just comforted everybody. Like, this is not just you, this is a general curvature that we can look at, wonder about. Oh my goodness. Now, do
Yeah.
you have some more to share about your findings with mental health, or were those the
Oh,
main ones?
so those are the overarching, but then
Okay.
there's the
Okay.
detailed. So we looked
Okay.
specifically at depression, anxiety, and PTSD.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
so um, ones, there was no
mhm,
correlation with
mm,
no relationship in any way.
mm.
Twos were slightly more likely than average to have anxiety. It wasn't at a statistically significant level for the cutoff of significance in the study, but
Okay.
they did trend towards being more anxious.
Mm,
Threes, there was no relationship. Type
okay.
fours were significantly likely to report depression, significantly likely to report PTSD, and slightly
Mm,
likely to report anxiety.
okay.
Fives,
Good to know.
no relationship.
Mm.
Sixes were significantly likely to report anxiety.
Yeah.
Again, nobody's surprised.
Right.
um,
Mm,
sevens,
mm,
there was no relationship.
mm. Yeah.
Eights were slightly more likely to have PTSD, which I think
Mm,
associates, at least in
mm,
my mind, a lot of eights report having gone through trauma as a kid that really
mhm.
just toughened them up. So that
Yes.
was an interesting,
Mm.
expected, but also very interesting result. And also, eights are slightly less likely to have anxiety. Um,
Okay.
and then nines were significantly unlikely to report either anxiety or PTSD.
Okay.
Um,
Wow.
so those are the types, but I do want to point out, I
Fascinating.
found it very fascinating that if you notice the types that had no relationship, it was all the odd numbers other than nine.
Oh,
Ones,
oh
threes,
my
fives, and
goodness.
sevens had no notable relationships.
Wow. And you just wonder, are there any correlations with that mapping with the ancient systems of
I
the
know.
Enneagram?
Now
It's
I
like
want to look into it.
the mathematician engineering brain wants to know, like, what are these
Yes.
correlations? Fascinating. And I don't think I've ever heard that so well undertaken with this kind of explanation, as well as how succinctly you put it. So thank you. And I'm just kind of pausing on some of the types to remember, as we were saying, some of them don't report it, but some of them do. And even the ones that did not, like I'm thinking of sevens, obviously they do have anxiety, but they don't report it. Fives do have anxiety, but don't share it. So
Yep.
it's fascinating for our listeners to kind of gauge, like, oh, yeah, I can see how, or like you said, for nines, there might be more performative, like, I need to help others, so I can't share. So
Yes.
it's fascinating to hear that this
Right.
kind of does show up in the research.
Yeah, and to your point, I think if you look at in the outlook or in for outlooks for the competency outlook, that's one, three, and five, and so
Mhm.
it
Mm.
could be that with that mindset of that competency mindset,
Mhm.
you don't. Why would you admit a failure? Why would you
Right.
admit that you can't handle something like this on your own? So again, yeah, it's not
Oh
saying
my
that
God.
fives aren't anxious. It's not saying that threes aren't depressed. It's saying that they probably are internalizing a lot of that and not
Yes.
seeking help, which can also
Right.
be very helpful for a partner to
Yes.
know if it's somebody's tendency to push that kind of thing down, to help encourage
Mhm.
them to get help or seek help or
Yes.
take personal steps if they're not willing to talk with a professional.
For saying that. I was just talking to one of my collective members about that this morning, that their partner in one of these groupings, the 135, they were like, they can't handle anything that I'm giving out emotionally. And so we were talking about, like, what are their visceral responses? What time of day might it be? Like, don't give up on your partner for emotional capacity, but also be aware if that's not their natural proclivity and they're not used to doing this. This may be very uncomfortable. It may not have been a survival skill. So thanks for helping us to see there are reasons why people may not feel they can go there. And also it can, there are positives short term, at least maybe for them, of not going there, but it doesn't always build intimacy or the safest space if we don't acknowledge our fears. So there's so many conversations within this. And also you mentioned twos being a little more anxious. And I was wondering if that's because as they're helping everybody, they can't help but spill over into a little anxiety. Is that what you were hypothesizing?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think I was a little surprised that they tended towards that, to be honest, because again, a diagnosis is different than an experience. So when you're asking for
Mm,
a diagnosis, I was almost expecting twos to be so self-sacrificial that
yeah.
they would never entertain that thought because
Yeah.
their needs don't matter. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to see that more
Yes,
twos are
exactly.
going towards getting diagnoses than
Mm,
than
yeah.
this.
Me too, because that means they're doing their work to say,
Yes.
all of this that I'm doing is creating a little overwhelm. So they're being mindful and hopefully now beginning these pre-contemplation, contemplation stages of doing the work with us. So your work is incredible. Can you tell us, do
Yeah,
you have time to tell us a little bit about the 1, 5, 7 correlations with neurodivergence?
sure. Yeah. So another part of the study was to look at that relationship. And again, it was going based off of diagnosed cases. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
you know, ADHD is a big one these days where I feel like a lot of people think they have ADHD and don't get it sought out. I also, medical professionals are diagnosing it more and more. So it just begs the
Yeah.
question, are there really more ADHD people now than there were before? Is it more accessible? Is it, there is a non-zero number of people who are using the system because they want to be able to take Adderall and be a higher performer.
Yeah.
So it's really it's a balance on
Mhm.
that. So again,
Mhm.
take it with a grain of salt. But
Yeah.
neurodivergence, a one was significantly unlikely to report having ADHD,
Mhm.
which to me says that one's again kind of that competency mindset, and
Yeah.
also maybe they really are just
Mhm.
so hyper focused into the world and attuned to what is going on around them that
Mhm.
they are very unlikely to have ADHD.
Mhm.
Um, type 5 was significantly likely to have autism, or
Mhm.
reported having an autism diagnosis. And
Mhm.
then the third significance from that test, oh, I'm sorry,
Oh, that's okay.
there's four actually.
Oh.
So type 7s were significantly likely to have ADHD,
Mhm.
and report having ADHD. And then type 9s were significantly unlikely to have autism.
Oh, wow. How interesting. Now, tell us about the type 5 with autism. It doesn't mean all fives have autism for those who
Correct.
just maybe worried, oh no, all fives have it. And I'm sure nobody did, but just in case, maybe you can spell that out.
Yeah, yeah, it's absolutely, again, correlation is not
Yeah.
causation. And so
Yes.
seeing a trend in data does not mean that every single person who identifies with one aspect of that data is going to be the other one. All it is a relationship. So yeah, my dad's a type 5. I love him to death. I
Yeah.
probably have a lot of type 5 tendencies that I
Yeah.
got from him.
Yeah.
Um, and he does have a very analytical mind, and he
Yeah.
is a little closed off emotionally.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
um, he takes a lot of time to think through things, and he needs a lot of just alone time to step away from the rest of us. He's in a house full of women, and
Yeah.
sometimes
Oh,
he just needs some time to go back in his own room and
yeah.
watch his movies and play his games, and that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there is a lot of conceptual overlap between an Enneagram Type 5 and
Yeah.
autism from a behavioral perspective. So, um,
Mm. Yeah.
you know, the framework of what autism is, or the autism spectrum disorder is, was built independently of a type 5. So there are conceptual overlaps, and I think that that's why you see that correlation. But again, just because you're
Yeah.
type 5 does not mean that
Yeah.
you have autism, and just because you have autism does not mean you're type 5.
Oh my gosh, so important. But it's nice to actually realize, like, if I do, what would be helpful to learn and how can we communicate? And there are some beautiful resources for couples for having a partner with any kind of neurodivergence that have really been becoming bigger. I teach that in my Enneagram and Marriage coach certification class, and it's helpful to learn if you do. So at that moment, I just want to remind everybody, like, it's so helpful just to hear this so that you guys can begin to walk through, okay, what is going on with us with mental health as you've walked through so many beautiful findings with us so that we might be able to have some courage. And I was also thinking with the ones with ADHD, ones are movers. And so I think with them moving and doing so much in the world, sometimes they can look like they have ADHD, but they're very ordered because they don't always have the emotional piece riding up, as we said earlier, about the logical competency. So it helps them to be a focused, fast moving person and to get a ton done because they're not being slowed down by having to re-emotionally regulate a lot, which I think that those with ADHD, at least from a seven's perspective, sometimes we're riding up and down with emotions so high that we're a little less, we're a bit more scattered because we're very sensitive emotionally. And so it's just interesting to see how it all plays out, isn't it?
I love it. I love
I
data.
love
I love
it.
Enneagram, and I love marrying the two together.
Me too. This is so cool.
Yeah.
Well, you're also going to teach us a bit about the we of the relationship. We've learned a lot about I language, but as I often say on this podcast, I think we, when we're talking about relationships, is just as important as I, because we are very important, and we've come to learn this. And many of the listeners here and especially I know you're a nine, like learning that we have value, that we're allowed to find who we are and do our own work is so valuable, but also learning how to be a healthy we in light of mental health is so important too. So maybe we can talk a little bit about when we find each other's triggers. Maybe we've come to learn through this episode or just on our own that our partners tends toward one of these issues we've talked about: PTSD, anxiety, depression, some sort of neurodivergence. What's something we can do in your view to help them when they're just like, oh my gosh, my partner and I are triggering each other?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. So I'll step back and start from a high level perspective.
Mm,
So the
mm,
goal of any relationship should be to have like a balanced triad of you, me, and we.
mm,
Um,
mm.
where the me is about prioritizing yourself, the you is about prioritizing the other person, and the
Yeah.
we is about prioritizing the relationship. So
Mhm,
when
mhm.
it comes to me, I asked my followers recently, which of the three they tended to hyper focus on when they were in a relationship.
Mm,
And kind of unsurprisingly, me was the least common answer. I think that there's probably a
mm.
little social desirability bias in there.
Oh yeah.
Um,
That is so funny. Like I never
nobody,
think of me.
nobody wants to admit it, but the ones who did, it was actually the most popular answer for threes,
Okay. Okay. So
and
they were
the
like,
second
yes,
most
I would
popular
love
answer. Yeah, this is the most second popular answer for ones.
that. Okay.
Um, But, if you have too much of a focus on me,
Yeah.
that's you start becoming a little self-centered, might come out
Yeah.
in some avoidant attachment. But also, if you have too little me, you start losing your identity. Uh,
Mm,
I'm sure nines and twos probably struggle in this area a bit. Um,
mm.
the
Yeah.
focus on you, unsurprisingly, the most common answer for twos and nines is to hyper focus on their partner.
Mm,
Um, Also half of the fours, which I found a little
mm.
interesting. But the
Yeah.
fours, I didn't really know where they would swing, but half of them said um, that they were most focused on you. Anyway,
Interesting.
if you have too much hyper focus on your partner, then that's when you start becoming too self sacrificial.
Mm.
A little bit of the anxious attachment of you revolving your identity around that other person's identity.
Yeah.
Um, but if you don't focus enough on the you, then you're going to start losing touch with your partner's identity, their needs, etc. Um,
Mm.
so those are two corners of the triad, the me and the you, and we kind of know how to keep those healthy in general. You work
Mm.
out, you eat right, you go to therapy, you learn your boundaries, and then you encourage your partner to do all of those things as well. Those are good
Mm.
maintenance. But then it gets
Yes.
to the we,
Mm.
that I think is a little bit more fuzzy for people, and also I think that it's kind of lost in the relationships time progression.
Mhm.
More often than it's not, and it can lead to a
Yes.
lot of relationship breakdowns. So,
Yes. So true.
we was the most popular answer for ones, sixes, and sevens as things that they
Okay.
tend to hyper focus on.
Okay.
I didn't
Interesting.
forget about you, fives and eights. You were actually evenly split across all three of the you, me,
Hmm.
and we, which I found interesting on its own, but
Yeah.
that's beside
Yeah.
the
Me
point.
too.
Yeah. Another funny anecdote is that fives were way more likely to give to like rank them and be like, I'm this first, and then I'm this second, and I'm that third.
Oh my gosh, that is
Which
so interesting to
I was like, okay,
systematize that.
fives.
That's funny. I love that.
I know. Anyways,
Yeah.
yeah, half of the fives saying that or half of the fives entering it in. And when I said, what's your type and what's your hyper focus? And they're like,
Mm.
boom, boom, boom. I'm like, I didn't ask for that, but all the fives got the same memo. But
Wow.
getting back on track here.
Yes, that's
um,
fascinating though.
just like you can have too much focus or too little focus on the you and the me, you can also have too much focus or too little focus on the we. Again, you're trying to find a balance. It's like a tripod. If you have one leg of a tripod that's too short or too long, the whole thing's going to be askew. So the goal is to get a balanced approach with all three aspects.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
having too little we is that's when you kind of get into that roommate mode,
Mhm.
where you're just two ships passing in the night, and you don't really have an entity to lean on that's a we entity. Maybe that was because you never really fostered that early in the relationship. You were super interested in, you wanted to learn about them and you wanted them to learn about you, but you didn't really build up that separate we together.
Yeah.
Um, or it could be that you had that and it just hasn't been actively maintained.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of the spectrum is the too much we, which
Mm.
in my opinion, is it just a net loss to the world if you're over focused on that instead of focusing on yourself or even giving time to focus to your partner as an individual. Like the Spice Girls song "When Two Become One," and
Yeah.
just the trope of two become one is
Yeah.
it's romantic, but
Mm.
to me, it's always been very sad because that is
Mm.
a loss. That is a loss to the world. It's
Yeah.
um, I think it should be more like 1 + 1 = 3, which in
Yeah.
a lot of wedding ceremonies, you actually see that. You have two
Yeah.
candles and they both light it. You go
Yes.
up and light one unity candle, but notice that neither candle disappears when you do that. You've created something new.
Hey.
And so that something
Gosh.
new
Yes.
is the we. Um,
Yes.
and I think that any healthy relationship has to create a new entity without overriding the existing entities.
Mm, mm. Wow.
Um,
Well said. Oh my gosh, go on. We just love that
okay.
because we talk a lot about the Enneagram glow here and how we have a new light that we cast together. And
Yeah.
so it's we still have ourselves, but please go on.
Mhm.
We love this.
Yes. Great. So from keeping the we healthy in a relationship really requires a proactive mindset rather than a reactive mindset.
Mm.
Um, if you think about preventative maintenance, we're really good at that in other aspects of our lives. Like we go get our oil changed in our car so it doesn't break down on the road. We
Mm.
will winterize our homes so the pipes don't
Yeah.
burst when it gets cold. Or we do
Yeah.
fire drills so we know how to get out of a building before
Yeah.
the fire hits.
Yeah.
Um, but for some reason, as humans, we tend to struggle to prioritize that preventative maintenance when we're in relationships, whether it's a partner or whether it's a friend or a family member.
Yeah.
We tend to wait to work on it until there's a relational breakdown.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm. That's
so
so good. Yes. So
yeah,
sad.
it is sad, and it's sad to, if you can just think a couple steps ahead, you can really fend off a lot of the problems that you see in relationships.
Mm.
Um, in an ideal world, preventative maintenance for everybody, for every partnership, would be going to weekly therapy together, do couples
Right.
counseling when
Yeah.
things are good, talk
Yeah.
about anything because you're making incremental steps towards a healthy relationship
Mm.
instead of letting it backtrack. So even if it
Yeah.
seems like a waste, you're at least taking steps forward.
Mm.
I understand that weekly couples counseling is not an affordable solution for most people, either
Yeah.
both financially and with time. Um, and so, if spending money on maintaining the we is out of the question, which is completely understandable for a lot of
Yeah.
people, at minimum, couples should be frequently having those open conversations with each other
Mm.
and being vulnerable with each other about anything
Yeah.
and everything. And
Mm.
I know not everybody is comfortable talking about their wants and their needs and their
Yeah.
mental health or their neurodivergence or any of that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, your partner they're that person that is supposed to be there for you and love you and accept you unconditionally no matter what. So if you're going to talk to anybody in this world about that,
Mm.
they should be your safe space to do so.
Mm. Yes. Building that safety together is so key so that they can become, which is kind of the earlier part of the episode, is learning each other's triggers and
Yeah.
honoring one another's stories and backgrounds. So I love how you're saying that is such a key part of the we also.
Mm-hmm. It's that maintenance.
Mm.
There's lots of another way to go about that maintenance could even be, listening to podcasts like this on relationships or reading a book on relationships and then discussing it afterwards. What parts stood out to you most? Where do you think we struggle? My personal favorite um, maintenance tool that my partner and I use religiously is this app called Paired.
Mm.
Um,
Tell us
yeah,
more. We were talking
yeah,
about this.
we were talking about this. So it's a relationship care app for couples,
Mhm.
but it was built by mental health professionals and relationship experts. So I don't
Mm.
know if you or your followers are familiar on Instagram or TikTok with Therapy Jeff, but like,
No, some of our listeners
oh,
probably are.
probably his videos pop up all over my Instagram. It knows my algorithm. So,
Oh,
um,
that's fun.
but so he's one of the relationship experts on that, a lot along with a lot of professors, mental health or
Mm.
licensed therapists,
Yeah.
PhDs, and
Mm.
so they've generated thousands of questions, games, quizzes
Mm.
on any topic that you can think of. There's
Oh
ones
my
on household
gosh.
chores, PDA, your sex preferences. whether or not you like practical jokes, like
Oh
anything and
my
everything you can think
goodness.
of, there's these different interactive ways. So you each will answer separately, and you only get to see the other person's answer once you've responded and submitted. And then it puts the answers side by side. So you can start
Oh,
talking through, oh, look, we aligned on these things. Oh, we answered like we used the same exact language in these. Oh, look how aligned we are. Or
yeah.
on the other side, oh, I did not expect you to answer that way.
Oh my.
That's shocking. Let's talk about it. Or we are so misaligned on this.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah. And actually, it's my 7 is obsessed with it. He was the one who decided that we should get the like buy the pro version.
Yeah, because I saw
Um,
that it was free too. And then there's a pro
yeah,
version. So you guys got that one. So it's even a deep
yeah.
dive.
And it's been we just found it incredibly helpful. For it starts proactive conversations, which again, proactivity over reactivity when it comes to relationships is what really helps foster that we.
Mm,
And we keep learning more about each other, even though we've known each other for a decade. So
mm,
it's also forced us, as 7s and 9s, we're not very
yeah.
good at these things, forced us to talk about harder conversations or
Mm, mhm.
things like finances or the future or our 5-year
Yeah.
plan, things that
Yeah.
7s and 9s actively
Don't want to
avoid.
talk about that. Yes. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
it's been our forcing function to have some of those less fun conversations, but
Yeah.
I would much rather discuss like our spending habits when
Yeah.
we have level heads. We're
Mm,
not, there's nothing at stake. We're not
mm,
being reactionary to something that happened. We're
yeah.
just willing to listen and learn what the other person has to say and share our own opinions in a calm way because it's just, oh, well, the app asked us to talk about it, so I guess we'll do
Mm,
it. As opposed to waiting to have that conversation when a heated fight breaks loose where we're accusing each other of being too frugal or too extravagant on our spending. In
mm,
those moments, you're not cut out to be having those conversations. So
mm.
having those proactive conversations has just been an absolute game changer. And I want to make it clear that I am not paid by Paired.
Yeah.
I am not. I just love their
Yeah.
app.
You use it. That's how you found it, was
To use it. It's
personally.
been it's just been so helpful. I did give them a heads up that I'd be having them or raving about them on your
Oh,
podcast.
oh.
So they very graciously offered 25% off of the pro version for
Oh
your
my
listeners.
gosh. Wow. That is so cool. I was so excited to hear this. And now our listeners can check it out. And now
I'm
they
so
have this
excited.
code in case they're like, I do want to go pro here. I love this. What do you love
Yeah,
about the pro? That is so generous. Thank you for reaching out like that and sharing. What do you feel
absolutely.
like they would want to know about that? Like, what made you guys take that deeper dive to say, let's do the pro version, just in case anyone's already like, I want to get that?
Yeah. For us, so we're in long distance. He's back in Kansas City
Yeah.
still, and I live
Oh,
in Scotland. So
yeah.
we've been, getting creative with ways to stay connected and stay in touch and keep the discussion going because when you don't see each other every day, then
Hmm.
just less things come up. So it's worked
Yes.
out great for us. But even when I'm back in town for stints of time and we'll be sitting together on the couch and say, hey, let's open up Paired and answer a few questions and we'll just do it right
Yeah.
then and there as opposed to doing it from a distance. So
My
it's
God.
just been lovely. If anyone listening wants to try it out, they've created their own landing page for your listeners. So it's paired.com.
Mm.
That's paired.com/E&M or EANDM.
Oh my
And they can look at it from there and learn more. And if they're interested in signing up, they can. I think it's something like $5 a month. It's really not a big investment, but it can make such big difference. And
gosh.
again, I'm not an affiliate. I receive no
Yeah.
financial
Oh,
benefit from anybody signing up. I
yes.
couldn't recommend them more.
Oh my gosh, you have just shown your beautiful nine that you went above and beyond to get a discount for all these listeners. And you're like, I don't even get anything off of it. Like, thank you. This is so beautiful. And I hope our listeners, they're very generous, will also give you a follow, see your beautiful research if they're not already. Thank you for explaining about how we can really move and grow together. And if it's okay with you, maybe we can still hear just a tidbit about how people can work with their triggers with each other if they especially are finding like isn't working, we're getting our self-care, we're getting our couples work going, we're getting our paired app maybe even, um when do they know that it's time to seek further care, further help?
Yeah. So from a triggers perspective, along the same lines of what we've been talking about, is talk about triggers before they actually trigger. That will help
Mm,
mentally prepare both yourself and your partner for if and when they happen. So
Mm.
there's like a lot of research on conspiracy theories, which I know is a very different beast, but it
Yeah.
highlights the psychology of humans' natural instinct to cement whatever they hear first and then
Interesting.
disregard any conflicting information that goes against their pre-established beliefs.
Mm.
Um, so in a similar vein, talking about your triggers before they're a problem, like what they are or how you might react or what might set you off, things you might say in the heat of the moment when you are
Mm.
triggered.
Yeah.
If you say talk about those prior to them actually triggering, you're setting an unemotional baseline that your partner is going to have an easier time supporting and accepting your
Mhm.
trigger reaction when it happens if they have already had a little bit of a heads up about it. And same for them.
Ooh.
Understanding their triggers will help you be more empathetic when they do trigger if you've already had that conversation. It's from just a human psychology standpoint. Um,
Oh, I love that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then also, sometimes you don't know where to start when talking about those triggers. So the Enneagram is a great way to start or to have
Mm.
that conversation. Just,
Yeah.
ask each other what are different stereotypes about your type that you don't agree with, or, ask them, this is what I understand an Enneagram 7 might be triggered by. How would you react to that? Do you think that would trigger you? And then also encourage both them and yourself to really think past your surface level response. Your knee jerk response will be like, oh, well, maybe it's just a nine thing, but a
Mhm.
nine's knee jerk response is going to be, oh, no, I'd be fine with it. I'd be completely fine. It wouldn't bother me. But
Mhm.
take a second and really ask yourself, because again, it's the betterment of the we if you're honest with them and honest with yourself in these moments of, you know, I actually probably wouldn't be okay with that.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
think I would probably mentally stew on it and I probably wouldn't say anything. And then it would start building up and resonating in my mind. And then one day I would snap and yell that, can't believe you don't respect me because you keep leaving the dishes on the counter. And it's like,
Yeah.
wow, that was, there's going to
Yeah.
be more to that leaving a dish on the counter. But if you talk about it before it happens, talk
Mm.
about the trigger of, when I see a dish on the counter, it reminds me to, my parents yelling me about dishes in my
Yeah.
childhood and I might take that out on
Yeah.
you. Or I feel
Yeah.
like it's mentally too stimulating and I get overstimulated when I see dishes about. So that
Yeah.
when you are triggered, because it will happen on
Mhm.
accident, you can kind of both be like, we've had this conversation. We've already kind of created a plan of action on how we're going to handle it. And then you can move forward together from that instead of letting it devolve or get nasty with each other.
Yes, that is so helpful that you are naming the narrative and letting your partner know why you're triggered versus the shame-based, hey, I triggered you because you're a jerk, or you should be able to handle this. And instead being more open and vulnerable about why you are triggered and helping them to see this is not anything they did wrong, but nor is it something that can be ignored on your end.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you are one, it's going to be super clunky. So you just efficiently shared the why, you shared our biases, which are fascinating, that I will be reflecting and chewing on and probably referring to in many other episodes. So thank you, Danielle. So
Yeah,
beautiful.
sure thing, sure thing. And, any sort of work towards your own mental health, towards your self-awareness, towards shedding your attachment to your ego, that's all fantastic, therapist or not. Therapists though can help with, I don't know, accountability for one. So, New Year's resolutions are a really good little tidbit, or
Mm,
it's a great example for how most humans have the best of intentions when it comes to self-improvement, but most of us,
mm,
when left to our own devices,
mm.
aren't great on the follow through. how
Yeah,
many how many New Year's
yeah.
resolutions have you heard that fail within the first week or month? So
Many. Yes, including some
yeah,
of my
so
own. So
saying I'm so
yeah,
saying, I'm going to work on my mental health by
yeah.
myself is noble and it's great. And if you can follow through on that, great. But the likelihood is that you won't. And therapists can really help provide that accountability partner.
Mm,
Um, Also, another sign that it might be time for therapy would be
mm,
if you're not seeing any positive changes on your own. Like if your mental health is staying low or your relationships aren't improving, you're not seeing the improvements that you're hoping for. Again, maybe it's a good time to go see a therapist and get a
mhm.
professional's help. Friends and family and partners are great for listening, but they're
Yeah,
not professionally trained in mental health. So
yeah.
take their advice with a grain of salt because a lot of times it can help, but there are times that the advice of friends and family and those listening to your problems that are near and dear to you are possibly going to be harmful. So, yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, this is so key. And even those therapists or coaches sharing one of my therapist networking groups I'm in called the Therapist Network, reminded us that therapists, even if you have a lot of friends who are therapists, are not your therapist. So get your therapist, even if you're like, I'm a helper already, I'm a pastor already, I'm somebody who helps others. Like, allow yourself for a moment. All of us can fall into that unhealthy two space of like, I don't need help. But
Mhm.
as you saw, twos get anxious. So we all
Yeah.
need that help at times. So just knowing there's no shame or stigma, and that, like you said, that's one of the best features for couples that are healthy. I had a couple say that to me the other day. They were like, why do we have to keep doing work many seasons over? And I'm just like, because life has a lot of touch points that are really hard. So you just invited everyone into that. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, such a joy. Absolutely. So thank you so much for coming on. We are so grateful. Everybody I know is just absolutely thankful. And also, you guys can follow her at Scientific Enneagram as well as Paired app.
Yeah. So on Instagram, it's at Scientific Enneagram. And then my website is just scientificenneagram.com.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I am so grateful that we also get the code and had this beautiful time with Danielle. What interesting facts she shared with us today. And more important than just facts and learning is the tools that you can get to put the learning on. So, whether it's grabbing the app or something else, I would love for you to take a moment now to honor yourself and the time you just put in here with us. Thank you so much. To take that deep breath and give yourself a moment to think about what are one or two actions you're going to do from today. Maybe you're like, I'm going to follow her and get that app or something else. But just allow yourself that moment, take a nice deep breath, and thank you so much for joining us today. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.